"You're finished, I'm calling the board. I'm calling the police, you're done, old man." That was the soundtrack of my morning HOA president Eleanor Karen Price, screeching in the middle of the street like a kettle left boiling too long. And what was she screaming about? Her beloved black Porsche 911, now resting on jack stands, stripped bare like a luxury jigsaw puzzle, someone dumped out on my curb. Wheels stacked neatly beside my garage. Mirrors removed with surgical precision. Windshield propped safely against my mailbox. Not a scratch, just perfectly disassembled piece by piece. She stomped and flailed while neighbors quietly gathered with their coffees, pretending they weren't enjoying every second. And me, I leaned on my porch railing, sipped my coffee, and said, "Morning, Eleanor. Seems your parking privileges expired." How did we get from her blocking my house every morning to me turning her Porsche into designer scrap metal without breaking a single law? Stick around. It's one for the books. But first, tell me you're watching from where and what time it is, and hit subscribe if you enjoy seeing HOA bullies learn the hard way. If you've ever lived under an HOA, you already know there are two kinds of people in neighborhoods like mine. The quiet ones, folks who just want to mow their lawn, watch their grandkids on weekends, and be left in peace. And then there are the self-appointed royalty types, the ones who think a clipboard and a title make them God's personal traffic warden. Eleanor Price, our very own HOA president, belonged squarely in the second category. But before she became my daily alarm clock, screaming about bylaws and common area authority, life in Oak Ridge Estates used to be simple. I moved into this neighborhood over 20 years ago with my late wife Marlene. She loved the way the oak trees arched over the street like old friends holding hands. She loved how quiet the mornings were and how the birds sounded like they were arguing cheerfully about breakfast. She loved the house most of all, a brick one-story with white trim and a driveway she insisted we repave with stone pavers because she said asphalt looked sad. After she passed, I kept everything exactly the way she left it. The roses she planted beside the mailbox, I still prune them every spring. The old bird bath she found at a flea market, still standing in the same sunny corner of the yard. And my driveway, those perfect gray pavers, I maintain them like sacred ground. To anyone else, it was just a driveway. To me, it was the last project we ever did together. So when someone disrespected that space, well, let's just say I didn't take it lightly. For most of the 20 years I'd lived here, the HOA was harmless. Mostly retired folks who just wanted to keep the neighborhood nice. Then they elected Eleanor. I remember the first time I saw her stepping out of a glossy black Porsche like she'd arrived for a photo shoot instead of a community meeting. She wore oversized sunglasses, heels too high for a suburban cul-de-sac, and a blazer so stiff it could have doubled as armor. Every sentence she spoke had the tone of someone who'd spent a little too long imaging herself running a Fortune 500 company. Instead of a homeowners association made up of 37 houses and one sad little park bench. Still, at first I didn't think much of her. People like that burn hot but flame out quick. Or so I thought. Then things escalated. It started the way all HOA nightmares do, with a letter. A thin white envelope taped to my door like a little surrender flag. I'd been restoring a vintage Chevy truck inside my garage. The project was taking a bit longer than expected, so one afternoon I rolled the truck half out to give myself more space to work. Only half out, still on my own driveway, not blocking the sidewalk, nothing illegal or unsafe. But that was enough for Eleanor. "You are in violation of HOA Rule 14B, the letter said, prohibiting partial garage overflow or unsightly automotive work visible from the street. Unsightly automotive work. That's what she called a pristine '67 Chevy being brought back to life. I shrugged it off at the time. People like her need to feel important. But more letters followed. A warning about my recycling bin being visible from certain angles. A note demanding I repaint my shutters because they were fading by approximately 6%. A threat of fines because my grass had inconsistent height patterns. I wish I were exaggerating. Still, I stayed polite. Quiet. Reasonable. Because that's who I am. Besides, she never crossed the line from annoying into personal. Not yet. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in late August. I walked outside with my mug of coffee, ready to head to the shop. The sun was just rising, casting that soft gold light that makes everything look peaceful. Until I saw it. Her Porsche. Sitting directly in front of my house. Not in front of hers, not down the street, not even in a guest spot, no. She parked it directly in front of my driveway. Not blocking me completely, but pulled up just close enough that backing out required a three-point turn worthy of a stunt driver. I stared at it for a long 10 seconds, wondering if she maybe had a delivery coming or a contractor, or literally any normal reason for choosing that exact location. But no, her own curb was completely open. Her driveway was empty. The guest parking lot a few houses down was wide open. I sighed, walked across the street, and knocked politely. Eleanor opened the door wearing expensive athleisure and holding a smoothie the color of radioactive algae. "Yes," she asked, as if I'd interrupted a national briefing. "Morning," I said. "I think you may have parked a little too close to my driveway." Mind shifting the Porsche back a few feet, she blinked, utterly unimpressed. "That's common area parking," she said. "Perfectly legal." "I'm not saying it's illegal," I replied calmly. "I'm saying it's blocking access to my driveway." She gave a slow shrug, one of those dismissive little movements that tell you exactly what someone thinks of your existence. "You'll manage," she said, and shut the door in my face. Not a sorry, not an "I'll move it," just a cold, deliberate dismissal. I felt my jaw tighten, but I let it go. One time isn't a pattern. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe I caught her in the middle of some Pilates-induced enlightenment. So I maneuvered my truck around the Porsche and left. But the next morning it was there again. Same spot, same angle, same unnecessary inconvenience. On day 3 I knocked again because I still believed in civility. This time she didn't even open the door. Her voice floated through the intercom. "It's legal parking, Marcus. Don't bother me with this again." I stood there in the morning haze, staring at her stupid camera lens, realizing something critically important. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't even about parking. This was a power move, a message, a psychological HOA turf war, and she wanted to show me that she made the rules, not me, that she could inconvenience me anytime she felt like it, that she was untouchable and I was just another homeowner she could boss around. And if you've ever dealt with a true textbook Karen, you know exactly the kind of smug satisfaction they get from petty dominance. But here's the thing. I may be quiet. I may be patient. I may be old. But I'm not weak. And I'm not someone you push into a corner. Especially not in front of my house. Especially not in front of Marlene's driveway. That was the moment something shifted. Not in anger. No anger is too messy. What I felt was clarity. A cold, precise sense of purpose. If Eleanor wanted a battle over parking, courtesy, and boundaries, then I was going to give her one. And I was going to win it the one way she'd never expect, not with shouting, not with intimidation, not with HOA politics, but with the one thing I've mastered better than anything else in this world: tools, logic, and mechanical perfection. She had just parked her Porsche in front of the wrong house, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming next. For the next several mornings, it became a routine, no, a ritual. I'd step outside with my coffee, breathe in the cool air, and there it would be, Eleanor's Porsche 911 draped arrogantly across the curb in front of my house like it was posing for a magazine shoot. The paint shimmered, the chrome gleamed, and the whole thing practically radiated smugness. Not because the car was smug, cars are innocent, but the driver, different story. On day 4, I tried something different. Instead of knocking on her door again, I left a polite note under her windshield wiper. Nothing dramatic, just "Good morning. Please avoid parking directly in front of my driveway again. It obstructs access. Thank you." Short, polite, civil. The next morning I found my note, stuffed into my mailbox, crumpled into a tight little ball like a spitball aimed at my dignity. That was the morning I stopped pretending this was anything but deliberate. By week 2, the Porsche's presence in front of my house became as predictable as sunrise. Neighbors noticed. Old Mr. Patterson, 2 houses down, shook his head every time he walked past. "Woman's got no shame," he whispered one morning. "She fined me last month because my garbage can wasn't facing the street properly. The wheels were turned the wrong direction," she said. "Mrs. Klein," a retired schoolteacher, told me, "she's been bullying folks around here ever since she became HOA president. But nobody wants to speak up. She knows the rules better than anyone and twists them like pretzels." I didn't realize it then, but the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for someone, anyone, to stand up to her. And without meaning to, I was becoming the poor soul elected by fate. One morning, after nearly clipping her car while backing out, I decided enough was enough. I strode across the street and knocked firmly on her door. She opened it, halfway blocking the entrance with her body, like she didn't want me contaminating her oxygen supply. "What now?" she muttered, arms folded. "You're blocking my driveway again," I said, as calmly as possible. "I need you to move your car." Her eyes narrowed. "That space is common property. I can park there if I want. You're causing an obstruction. You're being dramatic." Then she leaned in slightly, her perfume sharp enough to kill houseplants. Maybe if you kept your property tidier, we wouldn't be having these problems. Tidier, I raised an eyebrow. She pointed to my driveway. I saw that old truck project you rolled out last week. It's an eyesore. I just assumed you didn't care about curb appeal. I felt my teeth grind. That truck was my wife's favorite restoration. Oh, she said dismissively, well, it still looked like junk. I had to take a moment, just one, to stop myself from saying something I'd regret. Instead, I asked, are you going to move the car or not? She smiled a tight, satisfied little smirk. No, she said. I don't think I will. Then she closed the door. Right in my face. That was the first day I called the police. The officer who arrived was young, polite, and visibly uncomfortable to be dealing with what he clearly thought was petty neighbor drama. Unfortunately, sir, he told me, because her car isn't actually blocking your driveway by law, just close to it, we can't ticket her. So she isn't doing anything wrong, I asked. She's certainly being inconsiderate, he admitted. But legally speaking, it's an HOA matter. He walked across the street to talk to Eleanor. I watched from my porch as she transformed instantly into a sugary ball of innocence. Oh, officer, I would never intentionally inconvenience my neighbors, she cooed. I just didn't realize the spot was so sensitive. You know how confusing these common areas can be. I'll be more mindful. I didn't have to hear the rest. I saw the way she giggled, brushing imaginary dust off her designer leggings. I saw the way the officer softened, and I saw the way she looked at me afterward, a tiny, victorious sneer. That look said everything. The next day she parked even closer, close enough that I had to fold my side view mirror just to get out. I decided to take it to the HOA board. We had a monthly meeting anyway, and I figured it was time to bring this nonsense into the open. That night I arrived at the clubhouse early, hoping to speak calmly with a couple of the board members. But as soon as I walked in, I realized something was wrong. Eleanor had already beaten me there. She stood at the front of the room with several papers in hand, papers that looked suspiciously like written complaints. Well, speak of the devil, she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. The man of the hour. I ignored the jab and took a seat. The meeting started. First item on the agenda, me. Or more specifically, property violations at the Jones residence. I blinked. Excuse me, Eleanor smiled sweetly. It has come to my attention that your work truck was stored outside your garage for several days, violating Rule 14B. Additionally, your recycling bin was visible from the street last Thursday, and one of your shutters appears to be fading, possibly requiring repainting. I stared at her, stunned. She wasn't just inconveniencing me anymore. She was weaponizing the HOA against me. When I brought up the Porsche parked outside my house every morning, she dismissed it instantly. That's legal parking, she said. He's blowing it out of proportion. A couple of weaker board members nodded, not daring to challenge her, but others looked uneasy. Mr. Patterson eventually spoke up. I've seen her car there every day. It's getting out of hand. Eleanor shot him a glare sharp enough to cut meat. He went silent. The rest of the meeting was pointless. Every issue I raised was brushed aside. Every concern redirected. Every voice that dared speak up grew quiet under her stare. I left that night feeling something I rarely feel. Helpless. Not because I couldn't fight, but because I was fighting someone who didn't play fair. Someone who twisted rules, manipulated people, and hid behind the HOA like a shield. Someone who believed she was untouchable. But here's the thing about people who think they're untouchable. They always underestimate the quiet ones. And I've rebuilt entire engines from nothing but bolts and rust. I know how to take things apart. I know how to break something down so thoroughly that when you finally look at it, it doesn't even resemble what it used to be. So the next morning when her Porsche was sitting in front of my house, again gleaming, arrogant, expectant, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. A clean, sharp, perfect kind of clarity. If she wanted to make this a long-term battle, then I was going to show her exactly how long my patience and my skill could last, because she was playing checkers. But I've always been a chess man. And I had just moved my first piece. The very next morning, day 15 of this ridiculous parking standoff, I stepped outside at exactly 7:02 a.m., coffee in hand, already bracing myself. And sure enough, there it was. The Porsche sat so close to my driveway that a squirrel couldn't have squeezed between her bumper and my stone pavers. A sick part of me actually admired the consistency. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a ritual for her now, a little morning thrill, a way to assert dominance. And then came the moment that tilted the scales. As I was inching my truck out for work, Eleanor walked by with her fluffy white designer dog, a trembling little creature dressed in a pink sweater that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She paused, watched me maneuver around her car, and gave the kind of smirk you normally only see on villains right before they push a button that launches a missile. "Careful," she said sweetly. "Wouldn't want you to scratch my Porsche." She didn't even wait for a response. She just strutted off holding that yapping dog like a crown jewel. That was the exact moment something hardened inside me. Not anger, not frustration, resolve. But even when you're resolved, you don't go charging blindly into battle. Not when the opponent is a Karen with HOA power and a documented history of weaponizing bylaws. So instead of exploding, I pulled out my phone and took yet another time-stamped photo. Then I did the one thing Karens never expect. I followed the rules better than they did. That same morning, I called the non-emergency police line again. A different pair of officers showed up this time. A tall, tired man with a mustache and a shorter woman with hair pulled into a tight bun. I explained the issue as professionally as possible, showing them photos, dates, and a small folder I'd started keeping called Parking Incidents. I know how that sounds, believe me. The male officer scratched his chin. "Is she actually blocking your driveway, sir?" "Technically no," I said, "but she's obstructing access. I have to make a dangerous maneuver every morning just to leave my own property." The female officer nodded sympathetically. "It's inconsiderate, no doubt about that. Unfortunately, unless she's preventing you from getting your vehicle out, the city can't issue a ticket. This is an HOA-governed street. In other words, I said you can't help me." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Not officially. Document everything. If she escalates, you'll need proof for civil action." When they crossed the street to talk to Eleanor, I leaned against my truck and watched. And instantly, Eleanor transformed. Gone was the snarky smirk. Gone was the queen of the cul-de-sac energy. Instead, the officers got soft-voiced, wide-eyed Karen, one hand on her chest, pretending to be deeply hurt. "Oh, officers, I didn't realize I was told the curb was community property. I'll try my best to park elsewhere, but my driveway's layout is so inconvenient. It's hard for me to back out." A bald-faced lie. Her driveway was deep and perfectly accessible. Her Porsche even had backup sensors that could detect a butterfly at 20 feet. The officers warned her gently, she nodded politely, and they left. 10 minutes later, she walked past my yard again. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "See," she said, "even the police said I'm not doing anything wrong. Maybe you should try being more neighborly." I didn't respond. Her arrogance wasn't the important part. The important part was the officer's advice. Document everything. So I did. Over the next week, I took photos every single morning. I logged times. I recorded brief videos showing how close she parked and how difficult it was to leave safely. I printed each picture, labeled it, and stored it all in a blue binder. Neighbors began quietly cheering for me. Mrs. Klein would whisper, "Get her, Marcus." Mr. Patterson would murmur, "'Bout time someone stands up to the witch." But nobody wanted to be public about it. Karen had burned too many people already. I didn't blame them. I didn't need a cheering squad. I needed evidence. Because if I was going to push back, I wanted it to be righteous, undeniable, and absolutely legal. One morning I got fed up enough to try tow trucks again. I hadn't forgotten how she'd scared off the last company, but I wasn't done yet. I called 3 different towing services. One hung up as soon as I mentioned HOA dispute. Another politely declined. The third said they'd try. When the tow truck arrived, it made that beautiful beep, beep, beep sound as it backed up to her Porsche. The driver hopped out, a big guy with forearms thicker than my legs. "You authorize removal?" he asked. "Yes, it's obstructing access to my driveway," I replied, handing him the paperwork I'd prepared. He nodded and got to work. But right on cue, Eleanor burst out of her house like she'd been launched. Her hair was in curlers. Her pajamas were neon green. Her voice was nuclear. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched. The tow operator ignored her. He was a professional. She marched right up to him. "I am the HOA president. I am ordering you to stop." He didn't even blink. "Ma'am," the homeowner requested removal. "I have every right to you touch that car, and I will sue you. I swear I will drag your entire company through the courts. I'll have your license revoked. I'll make sure you never tow another vehicle in this state again." The driver paused. I saw the hesitation, the calculation. A simple tow job wasn't worth months of legal hell. "Sorry, sir," he whispered to me. "She's too much trouble." And just like that, he unhooked the Porsche and drove away. Eleanor watched him go with a victorious smirk, then turned to me, arms crossed triumphantly. "You really should stop embarrassing yourself," she said. "You won't win this." Then she strutted back inside like she'd just conquered Rome. I stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched. not in rage, in realization. I couldn't win playing her game. I couldn't win using her rules. She had the HOA under her thumb. She could bully tow drivers. She could rewrite reality in front of police. But there was one battlefield she couldn't control. The law. Real law. Not her twisted HOA interpretation of it. And suddenly, I knew what my next move was. That night, I pulled out every HOA document I had. The bylaws, the covenants, the city municipal codes, state property statutes. I sat at my dining table with a highlighter, reading glasses, and a pot of black coffee. Hours passed. Then it happened. I found something. A city ordinance about repeated obstruction of access. A state statute about persistent nuisances caused by improperly parked vehicles. HOA rules about harassment or targeted action toward another resident. And even better, another rule about vehicles left unattended causing safety hazards. If a vehicle creates a nuisance, the property owner has the right to remove or abate that nuisance, and nowhere did it specify how. The wording was vague, beautifully vague. My mind clicked like an engine purring to life. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could bully everyone with her title. But there's something about mechanical men like me. Give us a problem and we'll take it apart piece by piece, literally. That night, as I closed my binder full of evidence and highlighted statutes, I whispered to myself, "You want to play games, Eleanor Fine? Let's play my game." What I didn't know yet, what she definitely didn't know, was that this game would end with her Porsche looking like a high-end jigsaw puzzle scattered across my curb, and I would sleep better than I had in months. I've always believed a man's greatest strength isn't his fists, it's his patience. Patience builds engines. Patience restores classic cars. Patience turns an old man with a wrench into the only line of defense between chaos and craftsmanship. So when I decided to deal with Eleanor Karen Price once and for all, I didn't act out of hot-headed anger. I acted with the kind of cold, steady deliberation you develop only after 6 decades on this earth. The first step wasn't grabbing my tools. It was grabbing my notebook. For the next few days, I did nothing that she could interpret as retaliation. Nothing confrontational, nothing aggressive. I let her fall back into her rhythm, the rhythm of entitlement. At 7:10 every morning, her Porsche slid into place like clockwork. Sometimes closer to my driveway, sometimes further. Occasionally angled as if she were experimenting with the maximum annoyance achievable within the boundaries of physics. She'd walk away without looking back. Never once did she acknowledge the inconvenience she caused me or the danger she added to the road. But I didn't glare, didn't complain, didn't even poke my head outside when she passed. I let her think she'd won. That's the thing about people like her. They only understand pressure when you remove it. Take away the resistance and they get sloppy, careless, comfortable. And comfort makes arrogance predictable. While she was busy admiring herself in the HOA clubhouse windows, I was busy setting up my operation. My garage, usually the birthplace of restored Corvettes and polished Fords, became a war room. Every evening I spread out city codes, HOA bylaws, and printed copies of parking regulations like they were blueprints to a castle I was preparing to siege. I highlighted every sentence that mentioned obstructions, every clause that allowed removal of public nuisances, every paragraph that justified action necessary for safety or access. I took notes like a student studying for finals. Half of me felt ridiculous. The other half felt alive. The deeper I went, the more I realized something important. Eleanor had spent years bullying people using the bylaws, but she didn't actually understand the laws she waved around like a sword. That's the thing about tyrants, they rarely read the fine print, but I did, and that fine print became my arsenal. Once I had the legal framework mapped out, I needed documentation. I'm a mechanic, not a lawyer, but I've lived long enough to know the value of evidence. If things escalated, and with Karen, that was guaranteed, I wanted to stand unshakable. So I took pictures every morning. Not just pictures, strategic pictures. Wide shots to show street layout. Close shots to show distance to my driveway. Side angles to show sightline obstruction. Photos with the newspaper in frame to prove date. I recorded short videos showing how I had to maneuver dangerously close to her bumper just to leave my own home. I even printed out a map of our cul-de-sac and marked the parking patterns over 2 weeks. By day 7, my blue binder was nearly full. By day 10, it was overflowing. Every page was another nail in the coffin of her inevitable downfall. But legal groundwork wasn't the only thing I was preparing. I was also cleaning, sharpening, and organizing my tools. That part honestly felt therapeutic. I lined my socket wrenches by size on the workbench, polished the steel of my pry bars, checked the torque setting on my impact wrench, even replaced the worn pads on my creeper board. I wasn't preparing for destruction. I was preparing for art. Because if I was going to take apart a Porsche 911, I was going to do it with the same precision I applied to every classic car that ever rolled through my garage. Every bolt I removed would be accounted for. Every part neatly stacked. Nothing damaged, nothing broken. What I intended to do wasn't vandalism. It was non-destructive mechanical disassembly. A phrase that sounds boring until you consider how devastating it is to someone like Eleanor. Once my tools were ready, I drafted the most important weapon of all. A letter. Not a handwritten note. Not a folded scrap of paper tucked under a windshield. A formal, legally formatted, meticulously referenced document. It cited Municipal Code 6.41 subsection C. Property owners may abate ongoing nuisances obstructing access or safety. It cited HOA Bylaw 4. 7. A no resident shall repeatedly utilize shared or public space to harass or target another resident. It cited State Vehicle Statute 18-244 vehicles creating persistent safety hazards may be relocated or rendered inoperable for removal. The last line of the letter was my favorite. Failure to cease obstruction may result in removal, relocation, or partial disassembly of said vehicle as allowed by law. This letter serves as the final notice. I printed 2 copies, one to mail via certified mail signature required, the other laminated, sealed, and placed in my blue binder. On Friday afternoon, I watched from my window as the postal worker knocked on Karen's door. I watched Eleanor sign for the letter with a bored flick of her wrist. Good. Let her be bored. Let her ignore it. Because ignoring it was the final green light I needed. Saturday and Sunday passed without the Porsche appearing. At first, I thought she might have backed down. Maybe she'd finally realized I wasn't playing around. Maybe she had more sense than I gave her credit for. But then Monday arrived. At 7:03 a.m., I heard the sound. That familiar low purr of a German engine tuned for vanity more than performance. I lifted my blinds just a crack, and there she was. Karen pulled up in front of my house, slowed to a crawl, and parked her Porsche deliberately, almost theatrically, half an inch closer to my driveway than she ever had before. She stepped out slowly, adjusted her sunglasses, straightened her blazer. Then she turned and stared directly at my window. A challenge, a taunt, a declaration. She actually smirked before walking off, and I smiled. Not the smile of victory. Not yet. The smile of a man who has been handed exactly the mistake he was waiting for. That night I didn't sleep. I waited. Waited until every house on the street went dark. Waited until the last porch light clicked off. Waited until the cicadas were the only witnesses awake. At 2:14 a.m., when the world was silent, I opened my garage. The sound of my rolling toolbox echoed like a war drum. Every clink of metal on metal, every wheel of the floor jack rolling over concrete. Every soft hiss of air as I checked pressure on the jack stands. This wasn't revenge. This was engineering. This was justice by way of grease and torque. This was years of mechanical experience finally finding a very deserving canvas. When I stepped outside with my tools under the moonlight, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Calm, steady, unwavering clarity. Karen thought power came from yelling, from titles, from fear. But real power, it comes from knowledge, from precision, from the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. I approached her, Porsche placed my hand on the hood and whispered, "Let's get started." Because if she wanted to misuse the rules, I was about to use them better. And by the time the sun rose, her precious Porsche wouldn't be blocking anything ever again. There's something almost sacred about a neighborhood at 2 a.m. The streetlights cast long, soft shadows. The cicadas hum like a quiet choir. The wind carries the smell of freshly cut grass from 3 houses down. Everything feels still, like the whole world is paused. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I eased my garage door open, careful not to let it rattle. My rolling toolbox followed its wheels, whispering across the smooth concrete. Then came the floor jack, my trusty steel beast, low profile, smooth, silent, capable of lifting a small tank if I asked it to. I had one goal tonight, not to punish, not to destroy, but to teach. Teach Eleanor that boundaries matter. Teach her that common property isn't her personal playground. Teach her that I was not some elderly man she could push aside with a fake smile and a clipboard. This wasn't revenge. This was a lesson. And like any good lesson, it would be thorough, precise, and unforgettable. The Porsche sat in front of my house, glinting under the streetlights. Its glossy black paint reflected the moon like polished onyx. Beautiful car. One of the best machines Germany ever produced. It didn't deserve its owner. I took a deep breath, set my tools beside the driver's door, and slid the jack under the frame. I located the factory-approved lift points. Years of working with European cars had taught me exactly where a Porsche would complain if lifted wrong. But I wasn't about to make mistakes tonight. This needed to be perfect. With slow, deliberate pumps of the handle, the front of the Porsche rose off the pavement. The soft groan of metal and hydraulic pressure was a lullaby to my mechanic's heart. Once the jack stands were in place, I lowered the car onto them gently. Solid, stable, no shifting, no risks. Next came the impact wrench. Now, most people imagine impact wrenches as loud, obnoxious things, the kind NASCAR pit crews use at ear-splitting volume. Mine wasn't like that. I'd modded it myself, tuned it. It purred with a soft, controlled buzz, a whisper of power. The lug nuts spun off like they'd been waiting all week for this moment. One by one, I removed all 4 wheels, Michelin Pilot tires, black alloy rims worth a fortune. I set each wheel on a padded blanket by my garage wall, arranging them in a neat row like art pieces. Step 1 complete. If Eleanor happened to peek out her window right then, she'd have dropped dead from shock. But she didn't. She slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the mechanical surgery happening outside. With the wheels gone, the Porsche looked vulnerable, almost embarrassed. Good. Next was the battery. Porsches store their battery in the trunk, well, technically the frunk. I popped it open quietly, unscrewed the protective casing, and disconnected the terminals. No battery meant no alarm, no ignition, no electronics. No chance she could turn it on and pretend nothing happened. The battery, heavy and cold, went next to the wheels. Step 2. Then came the mirrors. Not many people know this, but Porsche side mirrors are attached with a series of hidden bolts and a locking clip that requires a special tool. Lucky for me, I had that tool. Lucky for her, I wasn't planning to damage a single part. Pop, slide, twist, lift. Both mirrors came off smoothly. I wrapped them in microfiber towels and placed them gently beside the battery. 3 steps down. The smaller parts were next wipers, rear spoiler bolts, and a few non-essential panels. Each one removed effortlessly, each one stacked carefully like puzzle pieces. The sight was beautiful. A German masterpiece slowly turning into a deconstructed sculpture. The windshield was the final boss. Modern Porsche windshields are bonded to the frame with urethane adhesive. Removing one without shattering it is an art. You need a flexible blade, a heat gun, steady hands, and the ability to move like a surgeon rather than a mechanic. Most shops don't even try, they call specialists. But I'd done it dozens of times. I heated the corners gently, slid the blade between the glass and the frame, worked it back and forth, slowly slicing through the adhesive. Bit by bit, line by line. 22 minutes later, the windshield broke free with a soft sigh. I attached suction cups, lifted it carefully, and carried it over to the side of my house like it was an ancient artifact. Not a single crack. Perfect. Always perfect. At this point, the Porsche looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie, stripped hollow, sitting on steel stands. But everything was intact, reversible, legal, a removable nuisance, nothing more. I cleaned up my tools, wiped down the street because I am that level of petty and tidy, and stood back to admire my work. It was satisfying. Not in a vengeful way, not in a triumphant way, in a complete way. Like finishing a restoration job or solving a mechanical puzzle. This wasn't destruction, this was order. The kind of order my wife would have smiled at. I took one final photo of the Porsche just for my binder and went inside. I showered, changed into clean clothes, brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Then I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the sky lighten to soft gold. This was going to be a hell of a morning. At exactly 7:18 a.m., like an alarm clock set by the universe, Eleanor's front door flew open. She stepped out wearing a robe that probably cost more than my pickup truck, clutching a thermos of herbal tea. Her hair was wrapped in a silk scarf. Her lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. She strutted toward her Porsche, then froze. For a full 5 seconds she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Her brain was buffering, loading the nightmare pixel by pixel. Then came the sound, a high-pitched animal-like shriek that echoed through the neighborhood and sent a flock of birds scattering. Oh my God, what did you do? What did you do to my car? Her voice cracked like broken glass. Neighbors stepped onto porches, curtains fluttered open, camera phones quietly recorded. I stepped outside slowly, sipping my coffee like this was any normal Tuesday. "Morning, Eleanor," I said calmly. "Looks like you're missing a few parts." You psycho," she screeched. "You destroyed it. You destroyed my Porsche." I tilted my head politely. "Destroyed, no. Everything is safe. Battery wheels, mirrors, windshield, all over by my garage. You're welcome to pick them up any time." "You had no right." "Oh, I did," I replied, taking another sip. "Your vehicle was a repeated obstruction. I warned you. In writing. Certified mail. Legal citations included. I even laminated a copy if you'd like it. This is illegal." "Actually," I said, pulling out my binder like a magician, revealing a trick, "it's very legal." That's when she screamed the legendary sentence that would become our neighborhood's favorite catchphrase. "You're finished, I'm calling the board. I'm calling the police, you're done, old man." And while she flailed and shrieked, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because this was only the beginning of her downfall. One meltdown, one ruined Porsche, one long overdue lesson, and she hadn't even met the police yet. If you've never heard a full-grown adult scream like a toddler who just dropped their ice cream, then you've never seen an HOA president discover her Porsche has been dismantled piece by piece at sunrise. Eleanor's meltdown that morning was so spectacular, so operatic, so award-worthy, that if I'd filmed it, I would have won Best Drama Short Film at every amateur film festival in the country. She shrieked. She stomped. She did that thing where her hands curled into claws like she wanted to tear reality apart. And the whole time, neighbors kept inching closer, some pretending to water their lawns, some walking their dogs for the third time that morning, some straight up holding their phones at chest height, secretly recording the chaos. But this wasn't the grand finale. This was the intermission. Because right after her screaming fit finished echoing through the cul-de-sac, she pulled out her phone, jabbed her finger at the screen, and screeched 911 yes. "I want to report a crime." Oh, I smiled so wide I felt the wrinkles stretch. The same two officers showed up, the polite young guy and the stern woman with the neat bun. Their cruiser rolled to a stop and they stepped out, both blinking rapidly as they took in the sight of the Porsche's skeletal remains sitting on jack stands like a German luxury carcass. The female officer raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Jones?" I nodded politely. "Good morning, officers." Before they could say anything else, Eleanor launched herself at them like a bat out of HOA hell. "Arrest him. Arrest this man right now. He destroyed my car, my beautiful car. He's dangerous, he's unstable, he's insane." She was shaking. Her voice cracked with hysteria. If she'd had pearls, she'd have clutched them hard enough to snap the string. The officers tried bless them to calm her down. "Ma'am, please no, do your job." Eleanor screamed, jabbing her finger toward me like she was presenting Exhibit A in a courtroom drama she'd rehearsed all night. The female officer cleared her throat and turned to me. "Sir, can you explain?" "With pleasure," I said. I walked calmly back into my house, retrieved my binder, and returned with the laminated letter in one hand and a stack of time-stamped photographs in the other. I handed them over like a waiter delivering a well-plated dish. The officer flipped through the photos, reviewed the letter, checked the certified mail receipt, Eleanor's signature shining like a beacon of arrogance. Her expression went from shocked to impressed to something dangerously close to, "Ma'am, you have officially messed with the wrong person." Then she delivered the verdict. "Ma'am," the officer said coolly, "based on the documentation, Mr. Jones issued multiple warnings, including a legally formatted notice. He has removed parts of your vehicle without causing damage. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. We cannot arrest him." The male officer coughed to hide a laugh. Eleanor's lower lip trembled like a loose bolt. "What do you mean you can't arrest him? Look at my car." "I see your car, ma'am," the officer said evenly, "but every action taken was reversible and documented. You were clearly warned. He acted within his rights under property abatement statutes. You can't be serious," she screeched. "He dismantled a Porsche." "Yes, ma'am," the officer replied, very neatly. Behind them, 3 neighbors snorted loudly. Another nearly dropped his coffee, trying not to laugh. I don't believe in humiliating people for fun, but even I couldn't deny it was a poetic moment. Eleanor had spent years lording over everyone with her HOA crown, and now she was powerless. Standing in her robe, screaming at the law, with half the neighborhood watching. The officers left soon after with a final piece of wisdom for her. "If you want the vehicle reassembled, you'll need to contact a professional mechanic. And we suggest resolving this civilly." When the cruiser pulled away, Eleanor spun around like she had whiplash. "You think this is over?" she hissed at me. "You think you've won?" I sipped my coffee calmly. I think I said your parking privileges have expired. That scream she let out could have cracked windshield glass. Over the next hour, a flatbed tow truck arrived. The operator stared at the car's corpse. Sir, ma'am, I'm gonna need 2 trips. Neighbors gathered sipping coffee like they were watching the morning news. The tow truck operator struggled to winch the wheelless Porsche onto the flatbed. Then he had to come back for the wheels, mirrors, battery, and windshield. By the time he finished, Eleanor looked physically deflated, like someone had slowly let the air out of her. Her posture slumped, her voice hoarse, her robe askew, her tyranny cracked. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. 3 days later, I received a letter, a very thick letter. A letter embossed with the name Law Offices of Burton and Stevens representing Eleanor Price. Inside was a lawsuit for $500,000. Claims included property destruction, emotional distress, defamation of character, harassment, and my personal favorite, deprivation of personal transportation, critical to HOA president duties. They basically claimed dismantling her. Porsche prevented her from being Queen Karen of the neighborhood. I nearly laughed so hard I choked on my tea. $500,000. Over a reversible disassembly she'd been warned about. I set the papers down, rubbed my temples, and whispered to myself, "Okay, Eleanor, you want round 2. Fine." So I called my nephew. He works for a law firm downtown. He referred me to a woman named attorney Lydia Grant. Lydia was quiet, razor-sharp, and had the calm energy of someone who eats entitled people for breakfast. I met her in her office, a place filled with framed legal victories and plants she hadn't watered in months. She skimmed Eleanor's lawsuit, smirked, and said, "Oh, this is adorable." Then she opened my binder, the photos, the timestamps, the certified mail, the laws I'd highlighted, and her smirk became a grin. "Mr. Jones," she said, "this is the most beautifully organized neighbor dispute file I've ever seen. You didn't just cover your bases, you built a cathedral on them." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. "We're not just going to defend you," she continued. "We're going to crush them." What followed was the beginning of Karen's unraveling. Lydia sent a counter-notice, demanded dismissal, threatened a countersuit for defamation and harassment. She subpoenaed HOA communications, requested meeting minutes, demanded they release financial records, and that's when the real secrets came out. Turns out, Eleanor had been waiving her own HOA fines, using HOA funds for executive expenses, issuing citations without board approval, and making unilateral decisions that violated their own bylaws. When the board discovered they could be held personally liable, they panicked. They called an emergency meeting. It was not a pretty sight. Board members confronted her. Residents demanded her removal. Her lawyer begged for a recess. Phones recorded everything. At one point, Eleanor shouted, "This is all because of that man and his stupid driveway." To which someone loudly whispered, "Well, maybe don't park your Porsche in front of it every morning, genius." The whole room erupted, and that was the moment it all fell apart. The lawsuit was withdrawn. The board unanimously voted to remove her as president. She was banned from issuing citations. She was fined for misuse of funds, and she was forced by legal agreement to issue a public written apology. 30 days posted, pinned at the top of the HOA Facebook page. By the time the sun set on her reign, Eleanor had gone from tyrant to community punchline. She moved out 3 months later. Her house sat empty for weeks, like even the building itself wanted a break from her spirit. And me, I slept better than I had in years. You'd think that after the lawsuit collapsed, after the board booted her from power, after her apology letter became the most screenshot post in HOA history, Eleanor would finally learn her lesson. But some people don't learn. They endure like a stain on your favorite shirt. Even when the color fades, the outline remains. The weeks after her downfall were interesting. Some mornings I'd see her peek through her blind's eyes, puffy hair unbrushed, just to check if I was outside. If I happened to be standing on my porch drinking coffee, she'd slam the blinds shut so fast I swear she left a dent in the wall. Other days, she timed her walks so precisely to avoid me, you'd think she was coordinating military maneuvers. But most days, she did nothing. No clipboard, no HOA vest, no barking orders at teenagers or lecturing dog walkers about leash lengths. Just silence. The kind that feels heavy, the kind a person makes when their world has shrunk around them. For the first time since she moved into the neighborhood, I saw Eleanor Price as not just a bully, but a small woman in a big robe clutching her grievances because they were the only things she'd ever owned. The Porsche saga wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. One crisp sunny morning I walked out to check my mail and spotted a familiar sight, a bright yellow flatbed truck pulling up in front of Eleanor's house. It was the same towing company that had hauled away the Porsche in pieces. The driver, a big guy with a beard who always smelled faintly of engine grease, hopped out and nodded at me. "Morning, Mr. Jones?" "Guess what? She's doing round two." "Round two?" I asked. He smirked. Porsche came back from the dealership. New windshield, recalibrated frame, refitted mirrors, new alignment, all four wheels torqued to spec. Even got a complimentary detail. And she refused to pay the reassembly bill. I blinked. "You're telling me she sent the car to get put back together and then didn't pay for the work?" "Yep," he said, snapping his gum. "Dealership kept it for 30 days. Then they filed a mechanic's lien. Now I'm here to repossess the Porsche." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Not loudly, not obnoxiously. Just the quiet laugh of a man who'd just discovered karma had a subscription plan. The driver shrugged. "Some folks just don't believe rules apply to them. I could have told you that," I said. He winked, then went off to do his job. 10 minutes later, the Porsche, fully reassembled and looking brand new, was chained to the flatbed and disappearing down the street like a defeated knight being dragged off the battlefield. Eleanor watched from her window. She didn't scream this time. She didn't call the police. She didn't bang on her door and demand justice. She just stood there, still. And in that stillness, I saw something crack. Not loudly, not violently, softly. Like something inside her had finally given up. 3 weeks later, a real estate sign appeared in her yard. A bold red one for sale, price to move subtle. Within days, agents and buyers streamed in. Everyone avoided me, probably because Eleanor told them some wild story about the unstable neighbor who dismantles cars. But buyers aren't stupid. They read the public HOA minutes. They saw the apology post. They heard the whispers. By week 2, the sign changed to price reduced, motivated seller. By week 3, open house, all offers welcome. And finally, after a month of no takers, sold at a loss. She didn't even say goodbye. On a gray Wednesday morning, I saw a moving truck pull up. A few hired hands loaded her things. Eleanor came outside wearing sunglasses big enough to block out the whole neighborhood. She looked smaller somehow. Deflated, softer. She paused at the end of her walkway and stared across the street. Right at me. I thought she might yell, or apologize, or say something meaningful, but she didn't. She simply shook her head, whispered something I couldn't hear, and got into the back seat of a black SUV. A moment later, the door shut, and she was gone like the last stubborn leaf finally falling from a tree that had clung to it for too long. And just like that, peace returned. Life after Karen better, calmer. Louder in the ways that matter, kids playing neighbors, chatting folks laughing across yard lines without fear of being fined for noise disturbances. The new couple who bought her house were friendly. They brought me cookies, asked for gardening tips, offered to help repaint my mailbox post. Normal people, warm people. People who didn't see the HOA as a throne. I didn't realize how much tension Eleanor had injected into the neighborhood until she was gone. The air literally felt lighter. Even the birds seemed louder. One neighbor told me, "I didn't know I'd been holding my breath for 2 years. Until now." And honestly, I felt the same way. A few weeks later, I found myself on my porch at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching the sun paint the paving stones my wife and I installed so many years ago. I thought about everything that had happened. The fights, the insults, the screaming, the lawsuit, the Porsche on jack stands. And for a moment I wondered, was it all worth it? The binder full of evidence, the night studying laws, the surgical disassembly of a very expensive car. Then I looked at my driveway, clean, empty, peaceful, and I heard my wife's voice in my memory. "Clean lines, Marcus. Everything in its proper place. That's peace." And I knew the answer. Yes, it was worth it. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't even about the Porsche. It was about boundaries, respect, home, keeping a promise to the woman I loved to protect our space, even after she was gone. When Karen parked in front of my house every morning, she wasn't just inconveniencing me, she was disrespecting my memories, my life, my sanctuary. And sometimes you have to stand up for the things that matter most, even if it means picking up a wrench and teaching an HOA tyrant the difference between power and responsibility. The new neighbors planted roses along the front of their home last week, red ones, just like Sarah used to grow. One of the little girls next door asked if she could help me wash my truck. I handed her a bucket and a sponge, and she giggled like I'd given her the keys to the kingdom. Those are the moments that make a neighborhood feel whole. Not rules, not citations, not parking guidelines. Connection, kindness, respect. As for me, I start most mornings the same way, coffee in hand, sun rising, driveway clear, and the deep, quiet satisfaction that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's this: karma isn't loud, karma isn't fast, karma is precise. Bullies, tyrants, and petty dictators rely on intimidation. They depend on people being too tired, too polite, or too scared to speak up. But when you stand your ground with calmness, with intelligence, with documentation, they crumble. Not because you hurt them, but because they were never as strong as they pretended to be. Protect your home, protect your peace, and never ever let someone walk over you just because they're louder. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a Karen, an HOA bully, or a neighbor who pushed you too far? Tell your story below. I read every comment. And if you enjoy justice served with a side of humor, don't forget to subscribe for more HOA stories just like this.